Henry David Thoreau wrote in Walden, "There are 1,000 hacking at the branches of evil, to one who is striking at the root." One can wonder about what specifically Thoreau was thinking when he first had that thought. During his day, there certainly was a tremendous amount of financial fraud, and the banking system was fraught with mischief. Banks failed all the time, leaving depositors high and dry, and silver money didn't prevent that from happening. The upper class lived what at the time were extravagant lifestyles, which were fed by the back-breaking labor of the lower class, who often worked in deplorable conditions. Young children worked alongside adults in factories and slaughterhouses just to earn enough to feed the family. Politicians told big lies to get elected, and once in office, their primary focus was always the next election. Political parties worked behind the scenes, hand in hand with big business, to make sure that their man was the one put forward to represent the people. Do you think that the recent canceling of the Colorado primary and awarding of 100% of the Republican delegates to Ted Cruz was the first time in history the corrupt political system was revealed for what it was? Think again. No. Thoreau, though he lived in a time without TV or internet, faced the same corrupt system that we have today. The nature of the beast has not changed. Perhaps that is because for every 1,000 hacking at the branches of evil, there is only one who is striking at the root, as Thoreau had said. But what was and what is this root? We can get a clue by reading about his 2-year-long personal experiment living a Spartan life near Walden Pond. Though he was a man of means, he decided to build a very meager shack by hand, using his own hands, cutting his own lumber, and using nails that were remnants from other projects. He wore clothing until it was no longer mendable. He subsisted largely on beans, which he grew himself. There were so many creature comforts he could have afforded, but he chose to do without. He wrote, "I went to the woods because I wished to live deliberately, to front only the essential facts of life, and see if I could not learn what it had to teach, and not, when I came to die, discover that I had not lived. I did not wish to live what was not life. Living is so dear. Nor did I wish to practice resignation, unless it was quite necessary. I wanted to live deep and suck out all the marrow of life, to live so sturdily and Spartan-like as to put to rout all that was not life, to cut a broad swath and shave close, to drive life into a corner and reduce it to its lowest terms." Maybe learning a little bit more about himself was all that he was seeking to accomplish, but I think in doing so he touched at the root of the system which, if struck properly, could lead to real change, both now as it could then. Let's talk about it. There are 1,000 hacking at the branches of evil for every one who is striking at the root. It's tempting to fixate on the fractional reserve banking system and the fiat money regime as the support pillar which, if struck properly, would crumble and take down the entire corrupt system of government and corporatism with it. But would it? I think the answer to that is no, as I discussed in my last video. Corrupt governments, graft, fraud, poverty, and domination by the elite existed when the money of the world was gold and silver, just as it exists now. All one needs to do is read the works of those who came before us to know that that is the case. Want to know the types of restraints hard money places on the powerful? Read the books The Money Changers and the Jungle by Upton Sinclair. He wrote that it is difficult to get a man to understand something when his salary depends upon his not understanding it. And he was right. No, gold and silver are not a threat to the root of the system that we view as evil. In fact, they are not even the means of hacking at one of the branches anymore. What do we accomplish when we buy gold and silver? I see it like this. We go to work at our job every day, where we serve those who own the company that we work for. Every few weeks we receive our pay in digital cash deposited in our bank account. We spend most of this cash paying for the stuff that we buy and servicing the debt that we took on when we bought items in the past. That digital cash is merely transferred from our bank account to the accounts held in the names of others, eventually making its way right back to the bank accounts of the companies who paid us for our labor in the first place. When we have a little digital cash left over, we have the choice to buy some gold and silver coin. When we do that, digital cash is merely transferred from our bank account to someone else's. It never really leaves the system. That's not to say that buying gold and silver is not a good idea for at least partially insulating yourself from the threats posed by the system. I think they are very effective at that. Saving in gold and silver can insulate you and your family from the threat of monetary inflation and from the threat of bank failure and bail-ins. It can insulate you and your family from frivolous lawsuits that target all of your wealth held in publicly discoverable form, which bank account balances certainly are. What I am saying is that when you buy gold and silver, it simply transfers your exposure to the banking and legal system to someone else who decided to sell you that gold and silver. I'll say that one more time so that it will sink in. When you buy gold and silver, you benefit by transferring your exposure to the banking and legal system to someone else who decided to sell you that gold and silver. It did absolutely nothing to change the resources available to the banking system. It didn't change the amount of physical gold and silver existing above ground. It just moved it. Personal hoarding of gold and silver is not a threat to the banking system anymore. This is a good thing for us because it almost eliminates the threat that in the event of a banking system failure, your gold and silver will be called away from you via executive order, as gold was in 1934. In the event of banking system distress, it is more likely that the government will eliminate physical cash, as Larry Summers has suggested be done with the $100 bill. It's tempting to fantasize that by going back to a gold or silver standard, we will completely transform the corrupt world in which we live. But all we need to do is to read about the times past from those who lived in those times to know that corruption, graft, and subjugation were just as bad, if not worse, when gold and silver were used as currency and the backbone of our monetary system, to know that fractional reserve banking and fiat money are not the route at which we need to strike. But what is this elusive route? I think Thoreau had the answer, even though he did not call it out as such. I alluded to it somewhat in my last video when I talked about the failures of the gold standard of the past. It was not the gold which failed us. It was our inability to deal with one another with the same honesty that gold demanded, which was the source of the failure of the system. Let's dig a little deeper and see if we can uncover the root that should serve as the target of our hacking. Back in our last presidential election cycle, we saw the media work, I believe in concert with the Republican Party, to marginalize Ron Paul and make sure that he was not the one offered up as the Republican presidential candidate. We're seeing the same type of behavior now as it pertains to Donald Trump. I'm not drawing a comparison between Ron Paul and Donald Trump when I make this statement. They have very little in common, except for the fact that they were not the candidates that the powers that be wanted to see in office. The system is set up to provide us with candidates to vote for who will serve the interests of the system, not our interests. When we finally arrive at the point in time in November when we vote for the next President of the United States, we will be able to choose between two people who have already been carefully pre-selected by corporate and elite special interests. And if by chance an anti-establishment candidate should slip through the cracks, he or she might meet with the same fate that John F. Kennedy faced. Our vote poses absolutely no threat to the system. It's a little like the choice of saving our wealth in gold and silver that way. Our choice of president, just as our choice of how we store our wealth, is not a threat to the current system, and the system has been designed that way. This is not intended to be a defeatist statement. Far from it. It is simply stated that voting one way or the other is not the route at which we should strike. It's merely one of the branches. If you desire true change, it has to be accomplished in a way that is much less convenient than simply buying gold or silver or pulling a lever in November. But rather than drone on and on about the thousands of branches that we can strike that won't change the system, let's talk about the root. The system we have now is a system of wealth transfer, from those who work hard and have few resources to those who have all of the resources and use their power and influence to maintain the continued transfer of that wealth. It is the excessive transfer of wealth from the masses to the elite that we need to target. Fix this problem, and you'll sever the root and starve the beast. There are so many sources of wealth transfer to discuss, and I will probably continue to name them and discuss them in future videos. But we can start with the biggest source of wealth transfer, our system of debt. According to a study conducted by ING in 2013, the total debt at that time in the world was $281 trillion. It was a huge number then, and probably much larger now. But just think about how much wealth flows as a result of that $281 trillion. Even at a low interest rate of 4%, this would represent a yearly wealth flow of more than $10 trillion. It is 15% of all the goods and services transacted in the entire world. Think that 4% mortgage that you have is a bargain? Think again. You want to hurt the banking elite? Buying gold and silver won't do it. If you want to hurt the banking elite, pay them back the money that they lent you. I know it sounds perverse, but the best way to hurt the corrupt banks is to pay them back what you borrowed from them, and never borrow from them again in the future. Interest payments are the food upon which the banking system beast feeds. Of course, one could go further and ask why it is that we take on all this debt in the first place. Simply put, it's the result of desire. We desire to have nice things. We desire to have fashionable things. A big house with modern and spacious kitchens and bathrooms with a multi-car garage. The latest styles of clothing that we saw the models in the magazines wearing. Nice cars that have status symbol emblems on them. Fancy cell phones and big screen TVs. And we want them all now, rather than later. Not only does this lead us to take on debt, something the banking elite are more than willing to encourage, it leads us to lock ourselves into the cycle of having to work harder and longer than we otherwise would need to. Thoreau remarked in his book Walden how fascinating it was to him that by leading a very simple life, he only needed to work for 2 hours a day and was able to spend the rest of his time bettering his mind and having meaningful conversations with guests that stopped by. Think his conclusion would be invalid today? I maintain that it is even more relevant today. Think about how we keep bemoaning the fact that a single-income family used to be able to get by just fine, whereas today a two-income family has trouble just making it to the end of the month. Could it be that our grandparents lived in a modest house that was similar in size to the modern garage? Could it be that our grandparents ate out only on special occasion, whereas today it's not unusual for a person to buy lunch at work every day? Could it be that our grandparents would mend their own clothes and maintain their appliances, while today we dispose of things as soon as something better is released on the market? I could go on. Do I need to? Chuck Palahniuk said in his book Fight Club, "Advertising has us chasing cars and clothes, working jobs we hate to buy shit we don't need." Yeah, he got it right. And yeah, it was a book before it was a movie. But think about it. How many hours of your life do you work and feel like you have no other choice because the system is against you? Then think about your house. Did you buy a $300,000 house instead of a $100,000 house because you could afford the mortgage payments? Think about the new car that you bought because you could afford the car payments, or maybe the one that you leased because the monthly payments were within your budget. How many extra years will you need to work as a result? And who is benefiting from the interest that you are paying on the debt? Exactly. And here's another thought. Nobody likes paying taxes. At least nobody that I know. I've heard many talk about protesting the system by refusing to pay tax. Consider this. Suppose that by consuming less in your life, you can reduce your need to work by 5 years or more. That is 5 years' worth of income, which can't be taxed because it's not earned. It's a way to pay fewer taxes, and it's completely legal. And it's also a way of withdrawing your support from a system that you may not particularly like to endorse. So where does this leave us? It tells us that our situation as a society is the result of a myriad of individual choices taken as a collective. The root to strike at is not one outside of ourselves. It is the feeling of unquenchable need and desire which lead to unchecked consumption. If we all learned to tame these desires, at least to the point where we could save for the things that we need, instead of living in a state of perpetual debt, the beast we resent would gradually starve and wither. And the beauty of this is that this action does not require martyrdom. In fact, reducing consumption can result in considerable personal gain. Thoreau said, "A man is rich in proportion to the number of things which he can afford to let alone." There is great wisdom in that idea. So I will make a modest proposal. By all means, fight the system. Just do it in a way that will actually result in meaningful change. Look to your current lifestyle and the choices you make that feed the beast, and then gradually take action in a way that prevents it from feeding upon you. And if you haven't read Walden, read it now. You can get a digital version for free on Amazon, and it is likely to enrich your life more than any opinion piece you read on Zero Hedge this week.